Hello, my name is Eric Hynes. I'm curator of film at Museum of the Moving Image, and I welcome you to this conversation about Erēmīta Anthologies, a new film that is in our virtual cinema that was made during the pandemic of 2020, and here we are in the pandemic of 2021. And we're very, very happy to be presenting this film, this very, very unique film, and I think one of the few films that I've seen during this year that finds a way of covering all the different ways that we've experiencing this particular time, but then I think also an opportunity for true creation and discovery, which is needed in all times, but in this particular time, even more powerful, at least for me. And if you're joining us after seeing the film, welcome, and we hope to give you some context. If you haven't seen the film yet, hopefully you will watch it after this conversation or in minutes into the conversation and rejoin us later. But I'm joined by the filmmakers involved with the making of it, the organizer of the project, Sam Abbas, and the filmmakers that he invited to participate in the process, Stefano Falivene, Antoine Héberlé, Soledad Rodríguez, Ashley Connor, and Alexis Zabé, and also the sound designer, Jason Candler, as you will find out is essential to the process of this film, and the nature of how this footage was gathered and then delivered to Sam, and the importance of sound throughout in creating the film, but then also in creating the effect the film has. So I'd love to start naturally with Sam. Sam, I'd love to know when this idea first came to you, where it found you as a filmmaker. I believe, like many other filmmakers here and elsewhere, you expected a very different year for yourself as a filmmaker. So to sort of pivot the way that you did to making, or being sort of the ones to sort of to start this process of making this film, I'd love to know, where it found you, how things started.
Um, I was I had left New York not this last November, the November before, with my partner. We went to Berlin uh, to see if we could live there for a bit. I I love Berlin as a city, but it's not somewhere I would want to live. And there was a lot of issues with finding housing, Airbnb to the next. And it was around the time where the concept of a pandemic became more and more relevant. Um, so she got a call from her brother and was like, "Look, like your sublease is about to end in a week. You still haven't found your next place to live. Why don't you go to France and stay in Normandy with your father?" So we decided that night we would leave in the morning. So I found a storage place, threw everything in there, took a train, went to France, and it was in the countryside. I'd like to say, I was telling Eric, I'd like to say I'm from New York. Been there for 8 years. I don't know if that justifies me being from New York, but uh, my personality, I like the chaos and everything being so hectic, and the countryside was the complete opposite of that. And I just felt the need to do something, to take the opportunity to do something, and um, I yeah, so I didn't know what it was. I knew that realistically, resource wise, um, the only thing to do was to try to make like a collaborative project with and take the limitations and try to like push it. And so I reached out to um, all the cinematographers that I admire and that I've always wanted to work with. And I thought this might be my only chance where they say, yes, we'll work with you. And I got lucky. And uh, yeah.
Why cinematographers?
That's a good question. I originally, the idea from the beginning, it was cinematographers. And then I had this idea that it would be if you guys remember, I think it was like, let's make something that's over 2 minutes and under 40 minutes, so we could put it together and then close it off with maybe um, a director I admired, and I had two people in mind um, who were working on their own thing, so they passed. So I thought, okay, let's just keep it as all cinematographers. But the reason I wanted to work with cinematographers in the first place is because um, I'm just a fan of, when it comes to films, like for me, everything is about imagery. I mean, I've worked with Soledad on 2 projects, and I think my priorities is imagery and the beauty of imagery, and you know, all these cinematographers are my heroes in that sense. Every single work you guys created has been mind blowing, really.
And so you were craving what each of these people might deliver in terms of images during this time.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was the invitation like? Were there rules? As you said, there's a certain time constraint here. Like, what were the rules, I think, for projects like this are really, really important. And you don't necessarily want to see the rule when you're watching it, but it's always interesting to know what those were.
Yeah, well, I reached out to, I would say, half on Instagram, and the other half from emails that I had found. And it was essentially like, you know, I think this is a great opportunity for us to work together, using just our cell phones. I mean, if I was a wealthy person, I would have loved to send everybody like an Amira and just like, okay, let's go, like, you know, everybody shoots there. But I knew like that wasn't going to be possible. I knew, so it was essentially just using our cell phones, and not having any money related to it. I was also coming from a place of, I don't know if it's bitterness, but I just like, I did not want it to feel like making a traditional sense of a film where you have, let's get financing, we have, and it was, and from the beginning I said it would be a very democratic setting. So like we voted on essentially everything. And the beauty of this was like, I wanted to curate the whole, but it's like, you take care of your pieces, and whatever you give me, that's how I could kind of figure out what that translates into. And then even with, like, in every aspect with the stills we released, just sending like, okay, what do you think about these stills, or even like the charity that we chose. So everything was kind of voted on, and that was like, something that I've always wanted to do, in the sense that it just really doesn't feel like making a film, but making something special together, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. So, which is just to catch me up. So the iPhone, the cell phone was the device during which things were going to be captured on. But then the films that each individual person created was edited and fully made individually, and submitted to you. And then there was a collective. So what is the nature of the democratic process in terms of the shaping of things, or in terms of contextualization? What was the democratic process?
So it was in terms of, everybody had full control on their own piece. They have full ownership of their own piece. So after this project, you know, they could take their pieces and do whatever they want with it. It was, when it came to this project, anything of any sort of like acquisition or anything, we would vote on it. It's not like up to me to decide. So in a general sense, it's like we vote on everything, and the majority wins.
Got it.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what you got back in terms of what each of you were thinking of in terms of when you received this invitation, why you said yes, where it found you, and then what you thought to make, because there's obviously, which is amazing, such different responses. Maybe we should start with Soledad, because you're the first chronologically, or not chronologically, you're the first one in the film as it plays out, outside of the contextualizing thread of footage, which of course I want to talk about, but I'm curious about what your response was to the invitation, and why you made what you made.
Okay, I think I'm the only one who worked with Sam, so it was like invitation from someone I already knew, and I already worked with him. So it was great to know for him again. And on the other hand, I was in the middle of a project. I was starting to making a documentary of my own. That was the first time I was like leading my own thing. Mm-hmm. And this pandemic starts, so I was a little bit frustrated and depressed. Why not? So it was like I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go into new new stuff, and I was at home. So this was an opportunity also, like, okay, let's do this. It was like a game, I think. And then when he mentioned like the others participants, I was like, oh, okay, this is great for me. They like work in some sort of way with these great colleagues, you know. It's like so.
So is what you made related? You said there was another thing that you were going to be working on your own. Was some of that energy or ideas made their way into this piece, or is this a real separate piece than that?
Yes, it's some takes that I have in this piece are from some investigation I was doing in the zoo. The documentary was about an elephant that after a long time, after like 40 or 50 years, she was going from the zoo, like she was living on a circus, then on a zoo, and now she's going to be like liberated in a sanctuary. And that was all going to like be in March, around March, and I was going with her in a truck from Argentina to Brazil in a 4-day travel by road. So I was like shooting her at the zoo and talking about a lot of people that was taking care of her, and I was very like upset of all the story and this huge animal living in a small cage. And so I had these ideas of, I don't know the word in English, maybe confinement, like confinamiento. Yeah, okay. So then something of that came out when I was start like recording things in my iPhone or trying to get together with like some sort of things. I shoot some things for this project, but then I also shoot my computer, like some image that I already had. So it was like something like crafted.
And you were using the phone to film what was on your computer. Is that part of what you're doing? Yeah. And so there's I don't want to use the wrong term, but irising effect that you use here, which is good.
Yeah, it was like a very manual thing. I didn't want to use anything, and I was like all the time like here at home. So I was trying a lot of things, and I think I shoot it with with something. I'm sorry. I English is not my first language, as you can imagine. So
I appreciate it.
I
know how frustrating it can be to want to talk about your work and not be speaking in your own language. I really appreciate it. But you're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You like a mesh, was it, Sully? Like the mesh that you put for with windows, so like the flies don't come in. Is that what you had on top of the phone?
No, not really. I tried that, but at the end it was only the texture of the computer, like of the screen of the computer. It depends on how you put it, and it was like an old roll of 35 millimeters. You know the. So I put it. Yeah, so I was like trying to look for things, and it was like a little reflect on the plastic, you know. So I was playing around.
Well, it's interesting that we'll get to later, but Antoine, there's also an irising effect in your project as well, which of course is very, very different. It's more of a scripted approach, but I loved seeing that rhyme, which feels right. I wouldn't necessarily have ordered up something from either of you, but the idea that of trying to, that you both have, have exteriors, you both are in landscape at times, but that kind of the confinement of that visual sort of confinement that's sort of like limiting our horizons or limiting the scope of what we're able to see feels quite spiritually right in terms of this time in our lives. So I really appreciated seeing that.
Yeah.
But let's stick in the linear process and go to actually Connor. and your piece, A Well-Watered Woman. And I was I was kind of taken aback seeing this film because I remember, I'm curious about the time, like when did you film this to start?
We all submitted them before June 1st.
For June 1st.
So it was basically, I got kicked out of England towards the end of March. And so from that to June 1st, which I think for like, especially, I don't know how it felt around the world, but especially in New York, I feel like the protest started, you know, there was this change of energy and this shift of energy. And this was very much before that. And I feel like New York had its own like death toll, death bell. It was like not a great place to be during the first part. And so like the energy around that shifted greatly once New York kind of came together into the streets. But before that, it was very solitary existence.
Well, I mean, I'm in New York as well, and of course that was my experience as well. But what I was trying to say is that I remember talking to friends about the importance of showers and baths. Like there was this, I don't know where it came from, and I'm sure that we could spend the next several years of our lives trying to understand this, but something about the escape of that space, or the renewal of that space in contrast to everything else and all the other spaces that I was in. And it's not a conversation I don't think I've ever had with many of these friends before, but it just kept coming up. So to see this manifestation of it from you was striking for me. So do you mind just talking a little bit about your impulse?
Well, I think for me, I'm a person about ritual. And I think, you know, being working DPs, you kind of design your life around what your external time is spent doing. And so suddenly I had no obligation, no time, no films coming up, definitely no shoots, no meetings, no nothing for a bit. And so my day was sort of structured. It's like I'd go to my rooftop, I'd look at the 4 directions, I'd walk to my front window. It just sort of became about this repetition. And I think for me, it was like I'd go on 1 3-mile walk through the really desolate part of my neighborhood, and I wouldn't see anybody. And then at night, it was like, now I have my bath. So I just became like this person I would wake up at sunrise kind of every day. And for me, when I've made my own personal work, I'm so structured and I kind of write everything out. I'm very meticulous in its construction. And this film was the exact opposite. I felt really depressed, and I just sort of picked up my camera and forced myself to do it. And when Sam contacted me, I was like, fuck this. I really don't want to do anything right now. I'm not feeling creative. I'm not feeling inspired. I'm just sad. And I kind of forced myself to do it. And so it became like this own diary of my days and what I'd see on my minimal walk around the neighborhood. And like, the bath, I think became this thing for me that I felt became a necessity to my existence. Like the sun would go down and I'd enter the water, and it was just very grounding.
Sure. I'm interested in the sort of alteration. I'm trying to find the best way of saying this, but how there are moments in your piece that are like a sort of a dense montage, and then there are moments where there's sort of movement within a shot where you get to sort of like spend a few seconds in a space, and there's a real rhythm to what you're doing there. So I'm just curious about your edit of this material, and if you're truly just sort of capturing, and then the edit process was entirely different, or whether you were shooting for a potential edit.
Definitely not shooting for an edit. I think something emerged, what my eye was drawn to. I sort of kept forcing myself to like take out my phone and shoot things, and sort of look at my neighborhood differently, and look at the plants in my house differently, and just sort of present the space, or my body is involved a lot. And I think that was sort of my own reckoning of what I've made women do forever for me, like behind the camera. So it was almost a personal investigation into like what I'm already focused on in my cinematography. And so it was kind of, the minutia of what the body means. And especially for me, which a lot of my work is connected to the body, and my body specifically, it became about looking at my body much differently when like my tool cannot be put to use in the way that I like to use it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious in your case, Ashley, because I know that you've been shooting for a long time, but you also had made your own films previous, and Soledad, that we were about to make your own project. And I'm just curious if this piece for either of you felt generative, if it felt actually like unlocking something or helpful in terms of how you spent the last year, or whether it's a record of a certain moment that lives there.
I mean, for me, you know, I think I went through a phase where I made the film and then I was very embarrassed about the film. I was very, I didn't watch it for months and months and months, and Sam would send me the cuts, and, you know, I didn't watch it for a very long time because I just couldn't bring myself to look at whatever, you know, depressive, strange state I was in at that time. And now I have enough separation where it feels like, you know, I always refer to shooting films as like our own personal diaries. And so it feels like of a time, of a space. And it was nice to make something personal again. So I would say I'm not going to start making a ton of films, but it did reopen a door that I felt had kind of closed, which is nice.
Ashley, I have a quick question. For the bathtub scenes, is it simply your phone is waterproof, or did you have something? I have like a question for everybody where like I want to know how you did this specific thing.
This is mine is essentially an iPhone commercial. You know, I've got that wide angle lens and they go into the water.
It actually is waterproof.
It's waterproof. I mean, I feel like they're not like throw it into the ocean and, you know, hope it comes out okay. I was just dipping it. No.
Okay.
And with me. Yeah.
Did you have a question for Soledad? Because I was going to move on, but you said you have a question for everybody, Sam. I don't want to. No. I want you to chime in, because this is actually an opportunity for you to have everybody at the same time. I bet you haven't had this either. But the third film in a row is Stefano's film, which is, and again, also chime in, Jason and Sam. I have specific questions about the flow of this, but if you have ideas about how this flow came to be, I want you to chime in at any time. But switching to a very different environment. In fact, we go to, you know, exteriors of Rome, and then make our way into a domestic space from being out in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about where the invitation found you, Stefano, and what you decided to make of it?
When I received the first email from Sam, my first question was, why me? Because I never met him before. You know, I said, why he chose me for that? Anyway, I think that was interesting project, and I spent a couple of days to try to tell my lockdown in the surrealistic way, but was a so surrealistic Rome. I live just in front of the Colosseum. You can imagine how many tourists every day I find on my way, because there are full of people. Was desert. To come out from the house with Rome and the Colosseum, everything was a desert. Some bus crossing or some police car, but nothing around, nobody around me. Was really surrealistic life. That's for me. So I decided just to tell my point of view. And my point of view was my kids, was my wife, was my house, in so different life. You know, it's so different. Our life is, you know, it's chaotic. Every people come in the house. My kids shouting. Everything was so calm in the lockdown. It was fantastic. Nobody asked me money because there are not to buy. So that was fantastic too, because, you know, and everything was so different but so great. I think that's what as the lockdown has been maybe the 2 or 3 period very, very, very quiet of my life. You know, was a lot of people was depressed. Me not. I was really great. So I just decided to shoot my point of view. In fact, you see, you see myself, also my shadow, because all the thing that I can see on me is my shadow, because otherwise I have no mirror in front. So, and I think that's maybe because my background with the neorealistic cinema in Italy, I don't know, maybe I think that's the only way to say it. My lockdown was the reality, and the reality was so surrealistic for me in that moment.
And I mean, at the same time, it's interesting to see certain things, there are elements in your film that have become commonplace for all of us, which is our interior spaces, our domestic spaces become our entire world in certain ways. And you have, I think your son studying with schoolmates.
Yes, studying Dante, our poetry.
Right, which of course, that's how most students around the world have studied for the last year. But those are the early days, and you can sort of see, you can tell now what the early days of, say, online study might look like versus maybe what it looks like now. And so it's interesting to sort of see that, to have a glimpse at the early stages of that. And then also those conversations that you're all having about the state of things and the theoretical nature of making a movie, and it seems absurd. And of course, there's been a year and there have probably been updates to what you've been able to do and not do over that time, but you captured that moment where it was just this perversity of looking into an uncertain future.
So it's I don't know. I understand very well your question, because my English is like Soledad English.
I'm also just yammering myself, so I'm not. It probably wasn't even a question, but I'm just sort of saying what I was able to relate to in terms of what you captured of a particular moment that seems really about that time.
But this particular one was really, it's not. I don't choose the moment to shoot. I just was my life in that moment. It's my kids that fight because how to cook food. It's I don't choose that. I was with my phone looking in the house, and I see my wife to do gym, my kids cooking, and I never chose one moment. Is just my life. Sometimes I take the iPhone and start to shoot. I never chose really the same moment, and never I rebuild some moment. There was some time I think, oh, this was great moment to shoot, but it was not. And so, but I said, I tried to rebuild this moment was a fact. My kids started to act, and was not good.
So in terms of the shape that it takes, can you talk a little bit about the shaping of it and exactly the sort of the length, the footage that you chose, and the order?
By shape?
The shaping that you made of the footage that you shot. The film that you made out of your footage.
Yeah, I don't understand. Sorry.
Just there's a certain length that your film has, and there's a certain ordering of the footage that you captured. And I'm just curious about the decisions that you made in terms of the edit.
In edit, you have to ask Sam, because I never edit the whole this. I send him a lot of stuff, and he edit for me.
So please, Sam, jump in. Tell us the decisions about that.
Stefano, well, that's not entirely true. You sent a nice big draft edit, and you just said, like, if you could trim it down a bit. So I just restructured it a tiny bit to make it, to find my own rhythm, I guess. And then I would share it back with Stefano and see if he gave the go-ahead. But there was very particular moments. I mean, there was so much footage, so I couldn't include it all. But there was very particular moments that just like really, I felt were very strong. Like, first of all, I do have a question for Stefano. Is when you were taking those walks outside, was it complete lockdown? Were you technically not allowed to be outside? Or
no, yes, because I got high blood pressure, and my doctor gave me permission to have 1 hour free, like in the prison, like in the jail, 1 hour free.
Would you stop it?
Yeah, I got permission for that, but that was great, because I realized that I was alone in the street in an area that's full of people all the time, and it was me and other 3 or 4 people maximum, maybe all of us with high blood pressure. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. So, but the footage really did speak for itself, and there was I can't take credit for any of it. It's just, especially the scene with the nuns waiting to enter. It was just very moments like that I just treasured, and I thought were so beautiful, and seeing your children and yeah and you speaking, and actually that was one of the questions, is when you were speaking with Nicola. I cannot pronounce.
Pecorini, yes, our colleagues, yes, because
And-
he was stuck. He was in Los Angeles. He was working there, and when lockdown started, he was stuck there in Los Angeles. And no, it was very nice time with him, because we speak almost every night. Has been a camera operator for him, and we are very, very friendly. And we joke a lot because he was in Los Angeles, and he said all the time, that's the best town to keep the distance, because here everybody keep the distance all the time.
Yeah, so like I said, it was all there. I can't really take credit for editing.
No, I would just say something about the nuns, because this is one of the shots that I lost, because one morning I was around 7:30 in the morning, and in old and broken basket field, I seen two nuns making footing with the dress. Was so surrealistic, this stuff, but I lost because I was not my iPhone with me. It was great.
So did everyone here use an iPhone?
I use the iPhone, yes.
Yeah, I use an iPhone too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dad?
Yeah, me too.
Ashley, you said you did. Antoine, iPhone?
iPhone 2, yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Let's get a sponsorship.
Yes.
Why? It's because of the texture that you are surprised, or?
No, I'm just wondering if everybody used an iPhone, or like, because I always have friends that are like against iPhones. They're like, no, I'm not the iPhone type, and you always have these arguments in dinner settings. So I was wondering if one of you guys were the anti-iPhones, but no, we all used iPhones.
Sam, that was your fault. You needed to find a Samsung user
Yeah.
just to have the contract.
I don't care about Apple or Samsung. It's the problem is to have a mobile phone. Let's spend all the life in the iPhone with the mobile phone in front of us. That's the big problem.
Mm.
Could you have imagined shooting this on like those old Nokia phones where they have the snake game? I feel like that would have been that would have been nice.
The problem with, honestly, would be converting whatever that footage at this point to whatever computer you have. I have some of those that I have some amazing footage in my memory that there's no way I'm ever going to be accessed again. But I'd love, but then the transition to Alexis's film is again, it's also a sociological impulse in a different way, in terms of not from a domestic space, but from a looking out. I'd love to know, if this was immediately the first thought that you had for what to do with this film, or exactly how you landed on this approach of shooting at Venice Beach.
It was definitely not the first impulse I had, and I did try to shoot other things. I mean, before landing on that, or deciding on this idea, and it just struck me because everything was shut down in LA. There was really nothing to go, nowhere to go, other than that you could go out to the streets and you could go to the park, and and we have a 2-year-old that was also stuck at home with us, So I used to take very long bike rides with him, and it was during one of those bike rides, that I went down to the boardwalk, which I haven't been there in a few weeks, and the first thing that struck me was that the encampments had grown by threefold, or what used to be only 1 or 2 blocks had suddenly turned into 5 blocks of homeless people living there. And so there was something that just kind of like caught my attention on first of all, that the boardwalk is always full of people, and it was completely desolate, and it had just been taken over by a different society, and then there was something about the contrast of how we were all stuck at home, but nevertheless, a very large group of people in LA was stuck in in their not homes, or you know, in a concept of home which is very different. So so that struck a chord, and so that kind of, that's when I decided, you know, oh, I should focus on this, and this will be cool, and it'll be interesting. And I've already, you know, I've been seeing also the communities grow around my neighborhood for so many years, and I've always had something that I wanted to show or say or talk or find out, or just kind of like, you know, create a little relationship and just kind of see what was, you know, what was going on right here in my community, you know. And so yeah, that's how I came to the decision, you know, to kind of focus on that.
It's such a remarkable thing to, I mean, in particularly in Los Angeles, where the homeless can some part of the year have an encampment and be relatively whatever comfortable temperature wise in that space, where in New York, you know, it's a very different experience. Not that people don't live on the streets all the time as well, but we are all been sort of like led outside. Like, we know that the safer place to be would be outside than inside, eating outside, gathering outside. And to sort of, in Los Angeles, I would imagine, right, that's always a presence in Venice Beach, but then to realize that the way that you're behaving puts you closer on a certain plane to those who are living there full time. That you are, you know, your mode of existence and of being able to be free is to be in the same space as people are using that space to live.
Yeah, and it was interesting, for example, also, like in my conversations with the people that live there, most of them believed that the whole virus thing was a hoax, because nobody within their communities got sick. They had 0 cases. So they were like, this is not real. This is complete fabrication. And they were so surprised when I told them that I knew a lot of people that had actually fallen ill, and knew people that had passed. They were like, what? Really? You know, they were totally convinced in their minds that this was all a hoax. So that was an interesting, also like a way of really seeing how little the communication exists between, you know, one world and the other, how little communication actually exists. And then also, you know, kind of like this thing about being outside and sheltering outside, how they actually sheltered better than anybody else in town, you know, which was, yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing to discover as well.
And it was within the mix of this entire project, it was quite something, in everyone's experiencing isolation and feeling isolation. Yours is the project where there's a conversation happening, you know, and it's a conversation that maybe normally doesn't happen. And for yourself, it's not something you had done prior in terms of your work.
Yes, no, it's nothing I probably would have done in my life, you know, just, you know, but kind of like forcing myself to you know, approach and introduce myself. It was an interesting process. Also, even just trying to get into talking to somebody, it was really hard. You know, I would get a lot of fuck offs like right away. You know, hey, excuse me, fuck off. Okay. You know, and finally, it's funny, but the first 2 people I interviewed ended up being the 2 characters that kind of give structure to the piece. After, you know, it was very frustrating because I was just trying to get more voices and it just wasn't happening. You know, people were either not interested in talking, were not in the right sense of mind and body to talk, even to have a conversation, or or anything. So it was more of I really kind of like did not really know where, you know, I had so many frustrating outings, you know, where I would go and try to get something and I'd come back and I couldn't really get anything because the community was very close to outsiders, you know, they weren't really, you know, and I totally understand that. So at the end, it was really about, you know, just reviewing the material, and then and trying to find some order within those conversations that I managed to have of, you know, what could be interesting, what is there to say there, you know. And then eventually it kind of like worked itself out, and yeah. And what was interesting too was that the first person I interviewed, I also, you know, I didn't realize, but I totally screwed up the sound on that. And I didn't realize it until I got home. And then I just trying also to recreate that conversation with that person because I wanted better sound, and it was just never happened. So, you know, it was, you know, we wouldn't even be able to communicate the same way that we communicated that first day. You know, he would be into like another, you know, but at the end of the day, between both interviews, and thanks Jason for making that warbled speech kind of, you know, audible, you know. That was amazing. Yeah.
Jason's being patient. I do have questions for him about the sound, but feel free to chime in about particular challenges on these. But I mean, you know, like, but the thought that I have in general is how everyone thought of sound and how you solved for it, whether it was just simply what the iPhone was taking, or whether there were certain solutions in certain situations for sound. Like the fact that you even were aware of that, Alexis, means that you're clearly thinking about.
Yeah, but I wasn't, you know, I wasn't focused on it when I was shooting. I'm not used to focusing on sound, so I was like, oh, it'll be okay. And then I guess I think for some reason I had some setting mixed up on that first interview where it was recording with the back microphone instead of the front microphone, so my voice was crystal clear. And then whatever I could get, so it was just, but it was an interesting process. And also I kind of enjoyed picking something outside of my bubble, because it just kind of forced me also to get out, and just be somewhere that's not my house, that's not the park, that's not the blocks around my house, so that was also nice. I was thankful to have like an excuse to get out and try and get something and try to document something.
Alexis, I have two questions for you. For your track shots, was it from your bicycle or from a car?
Yeah, it was from my bicycle.
And then my other question is, after you got your in with those two individuals, was the community as a whole more receptive to you filming, or did it not make a difference?
Not really, no. And I realized how disparate the community is, and not everybody knows everybody, and not everybody talks to anyone. There's a lot of conflict even going on within that community, and I feel that even the communities in Venice are kind of like the ones who are able to live with there's so much in the public space there that they can use it. Like there's public restrooms, there's public showers, there's they kind of make a living on the boardwalk, which they weren't really getting any money for a long time, for months. But yeah, but the one who was receptive was our main guy. He was receptive, and he was he was semi-open to me coming back one more time and interviewing him, and then he was like, yeah, come and shoot me playing with my band. D-Rock was a good guy. Yeah, he was a cool guy.
And he's a wonderful musician, and I truly wish we could have added it, but I'm very I don't know music as Jason Soledad would tell you. What was the name of that song? I remember being like, yeah, sure, and then I looked it up and I was like, oh, this is a huge song.
No, they were playing. I have to go back to the emails, and I can't remember. I know they were playing. Was it the Red Hot Chili Peppers song? Maybe.
It was a Prince tune. You had When Doves Cry all over.
Yes. Also,
like, yeah, don't worry about it. And then like I look up, and then I was like, oh no, they're huge. I don't think I would.
All of whatever they played are all just like they're like the definitely the hits of the hits. Yeah. But at the end, it just kind of worked to see him thanking it just works better, than seeing them playing. I don't know. Just keep it simple, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic piece. And finally, Antoine, who I would say throws the biggest curveball of all within the context of this, by having a really fully scripted short film. And I'm curious if this is something that you concocted upon the invitation. Is this something you were thinking about otherwise? Is this something that you've been wanting to work out? I mean, it's such a beautiful singular piece, and I'm just curious about the origins for it.
Well, I think that I wanted to face this process of directing a film for a long time, and I was about to start because these last years I felt very like a prisoner, depending of the offers of the directors, and so I had some project of documentaries. I shot documentaries with my wife, by the way, also, and for people a long time ago, but I used to shoot a feature film, and I really want to try to let's say to find my way to create something much more close to the feature film than a documentary, because I really want to face this process. So I I started to imagine what can I shoot from my apartment. I'm living in at the 5th floor of an old building. So as you saw by the staircase, I love my staircase, by the way. And I was locked down with my wife and my daughter that came from Paris to locked with us. And we invited also a very close friend of my daughter to stay with us during the lockdown. So I started to imagine what can I try to relate to with the world around me. I had 2 young actors, maybe actors, but I wanted to try. I had a location, but I didn't want to make something too close to reality. I want to I don't know, to swift, they say something a little far from reality and make something, try something more poetic. And so I didn't know exactly what should be the scenario. There was no scenario, by the way. Finally, I wrote it because I was afraid to lost the globality of the story. So I had to write it to be sure that for the editing I won't miss something. But I started to say, okay, I have 2 young girls, and maybe they could live together in the same building, but because they didn't know each other, but maybe this lockdown, because of the quiet atmosphere that Stefano was speaking about, you can hear more what's going on around you. You know, you don't used to pay attention exactly about all the noises around. So I tried to imagine something in relation of that, and I imagined this story of 2 young girls. By the way, we have a maid room in the 6th floor that I dressed for my friends when they are coming. So I imagine that one of her was living in the 6th floor and the other in the 5th floor. And it's a question of meeting, because this lockdown, I just wanted to say that it didn't, it allowed us also to meet each other. And for example, every day at 8 in the night, every people was on the balconies, and there was a kind of radio that was organized by a neighbor in the other side of the road, and there was music playing during 5 minutes, people singing together on the balconies, and we shared a lot like this from the distance, but it was a way to meet. So I imagine that story that one of the girl was listening something weird and or different, and she decided to go upstairs and try to understand why it's so silent. So that was the first idea, and so I started to shoot some scenes, and step by step I built the story like this. But it was really step by step according to my environment and the people that was living with me. And there was something very interesting for me also, is I have to confess that I use a little Zoom device to record some white sound, because for me it was really interesting to try to relate something through the sound, you know. So that was the process. And so I shot myself, shot my wife, and I shot my daughters on her friend, and I built this story step by step. But I really wanted to, I didn't want to do a kind of documentary, and I didn't want also to shoot my apartment, because it was too strong as a location, too many things that, too many, how to say, significations, I want to be a little far from a very specific place. That's the process, more or less.
It's fascinating because you've described it as kind of effectively a home movie, and yet nothing about what we see really speaks to those limitations. It's its own world. It creates an entire world. The locations all feel perfectly appropriate to the narrative that you've created, and what you've just described is something that's nothing but limitations and homebound locations. It's extraordinary what you've done.
By the way, we had the chance that we were allowed to go out during 1 hour and 1 kilometer long. So I jumped on that opportunity to have these few shots on the shore or in the sea, but most of the time I was looking for the street from the top, and the top of the buildings, people living, the lights, and so I was it was incredible for me to use this iPhone, because I discovered how it's easy to shoot with this device, and how it's really great to have such a good camera, by the way, all the time long, all the day long. It's really nice. All the night long also sometimes.
Okay, I'd love to start getting into the sort of the overall question from Sam and Jason regarding what was delivered to you and sort of what you had to solve for in terms of creating this narrative. Sam, also your film, with the footage that you have that gets threaded through here, which I think is an extremely important part of it. But maybe let's start with Jason in terms of the challenges for sound, because I think the sound journey that you take us on is a hugely important part of this. But I also know that what we're hearing is that the device for capturing sound is not ideal a lot of the time.
That's very true. So I came onto this pretty much as things were well, not only was life being locked down, but the picture was pretty much locked down as well. So it was just maybe a few touch-ups here and there. So everyone pretty much had their project done. I'd say Antoine and Ashley, yours was complete. In fact, we didn't even, you were like, the sound is great as is, maybe a couple of touch-ups here and there. So I was like, okay, fine, great.
Which is interesting because they're so different, obviously, in terms of like what the films are. So the fact that those sounds were kind of perfect unto themselves.
Yeah. I mean, the way I like to approach doing sound on films like this is just keep it, and in general, just keep things as organic as possible. Try to keep your sounds from the source. So like it's either scouring through whatever footage you have and picking up whatever sounds you have from the original sources and use those. And if you need to do any sort of quote unquote design, you just simply take the sounds that you have and you twist them around and you do something with them. And I would ask Sam for that. I said, give me as much as possible, from whatever you have, give it to me. So that way I have something to work with. And if it was completed, then I really didn't, as in the case of Antoine and Ashley, it's like they felt those films were intact and together. I'm going to focus my energy somewhere else and then wait until everything comes together. And I have to look at it as a full mix, then go in and mix things and see where things are maybe too dynamic or just pull things in a little bit with some EQ. As far as the other projects go, Soledad, you chose this wild effect on all the sound, and so then suddenly we came into a situation where we had Michael Jackson's Thriller on the track, and it was just like, well, that's just not going to fly. We forget it. We can't show it anywhere. Unless you get the estate or whoever owns the rights for that now. So it was like, okay, we have to remove Thriller. And then it was like, well, what do we replace it with? And then I was handed stuff that didn't have the effect on it. So here I had to recreate the effect. So it was like, well, how did you create the effect? Oh, I don't remember. I did sort of this and this. And I was like, okay. So I said, well, okay, let me just grab the toilet roll paper roll and take the sound and record it through the toilet paper roll, and boom, there we go. Ah, it's pretty close. Good. We'll roll with that. Great. So, so that was that. And Alexis, you had When Doves Cry on it. It was like, okay, you know, a lot of the films had such a documentary feel to it that it became a forensic job. Because documentary, you don't want to touch too much. You don't want to impress upon it with different sound effects and all the craziness if you want to keep it in that realm of documentary, unless you're trying to impress a different sort of emotion on the footage. And you know, the emotion that I got from it was the emotion that I tried to stick to it. So there you go. You know, just like, all right, it becomes forensic. You have to remove the stuff that we can't use and try to recreate from what you got. And you know, it became all those tools that you know, those amazing sound tools that just a few years ago were impossible.
Right.
But I have to say, Jason had a huge job also in my errors of delivery. I've always like, I've worked with Jason before, and I've been fortunate where someone helps in terms of like sends the files that Jason needs to Jason. And so this was the first time I send you all the, you know, with time codes and everything. And it was a complete disaster. I mean, everything was off, like completely off, if I remember correctly. And then you'd be like, this is like completely off. And it was also stuff like, yeah, like you said, you wanted more from, for instance, certain people's pieces. So I had to look at all their footage versus the cut they sent me to try to like export just the audio of that and be like, okay, can you use any of this? So it was I mean, you're being very modest, but I think I handed you, every time I would email you, I was ready for a mean email back, like you're driving me nuts. But
I'm used to this sort of thing, but you know, I mean, this was a real jigsaw puzzle. You know, Alexis, you gave me all these files that were kind of submixes of their own together, and it was like, I need the individual pieces so I could do a proper mix with this, and somehow, you know, I mean, I made do with you know, the end result. Yeah.
Well, I think, and from this position, I would say you did better than make do. I think it is really the sonic journey that one goes on here is crucial to this. And,
Well,
and it's interesting to hear that Soledad that you had sort of done, that you had sort of distorted or had a particular idea for your sound, because it's a headspace, a piece, and I think sound is crucial to how that plays.
Yeah, I love that effect that was created. You know, it was instant. It was like, I'm not touching that. That's beautiful. You know, it really does create that, you know, we're closed in, you know, it really does. And my whole pandemic experience was very surreal and different from, because I was in New York, and my wife was fortunate to have a friend to get us out of town. So we were in Martha's Vineyard in the middle of nowhere. I mean, in the middle of the woods. You'd go out, you couldn't even see your neighbors. It was so disconnect, you know. And Sam's emailing me like, yeah, you know, I'm doing this film about the pandemic. I'm like, okay, just get me the stuff as it comes. And so it came.
Sam, I think we're running out of time, but I do think it's really crucial for you to address the shaping. I mean, as concise as you can, because I know you could probably speak forever about this aspect of it, but the shape that it took and how, you know, what you were doing in terms of threading through both text and your own footage.
Yeah, I think in the beginning I had no idea what to expect. I mean, you can't really you can't expect anything until you get everyone's pieces. And once it slowly came in, everyone at a different date, I was able to kind of start thinking about how you could put this together. During the pandemic, my friends had gifted me with the Criterion channel, what's it called, like subscription. But I was too bitter to watch anything. I was too depressed. I see like almost everyone here. So I wanted nothing to do with watching films. But I was really interested in Caravaggio, looking up all of Caravaggio's work, understanding him as a person. And then I started reading Friedrich Nietzsche, and that kind of stuck in the back of my head because, you know, Thus Spoke Zarathustra was, you know, a work of his that, as people were sending stuff in, I thought there's really a direct connection here with a lot of the stuff, because it's about this individual who's 30 years old, decides to go into isolation for 10 years, and then after the 10 years decides to, okay, let me see if I could spread this knowledge to humankind. And right away, I just started matching people's pieces, where I was like, my piece and Soledad's piece is like the perfect example of like the isolation, especially because Soledad's piece, well, we both had animals, but Soledad's piece had the elephant, and with Zarathustra, he was with an eagle and a snake. And then immediately with Ashley's piece, I was like, this is Zarathustra, like, you know, and it's just like, it's this sense of like becoming whole. It was so beautiful. And then as soon as I saw Stefano's piece and Alexis's piece, I was like, these are the different journeys he started encountering as he left isolation. And at the same time, it's something that I've always wanted to do, is just rediscover or think about the history of cinema in various forms. And that's why I wanted to include, at first, I think it was like a 15-minute intermission, and then my partner was like, you're absolutely out of your mind. So then I brought it down to 6 minutes, because I mean, I was a child, and then it stopped, and obviously that was due to the film changing when you're in a theater. But like just the concept of having an intermission, I think that, along with the sense of like an intermission in this sense, just watching a frame of a dog sleeping, my dog sleeping, and listening to music, it's kind of like really relatable to the feeling of, or at least I had during the pandemic. There's not much for me to do. I was staring at my dog most of the time. And then Antoine's piece was like the cherry on the cake, because it almost reminded me of old cinema, you know, and it had its own style and taste, and I was like, this is the perfect ending to all of this, whatever this is. But yeah, like I said, I mean, from the beginning, I remember when I wrote everybody, I was like, shoot, I think it was like, shoot whoever you want with whatever you want, just all you have to do is use a cell phone, and I had no idea what would come out of it. And I think it slowly, just organically came to this based on what I was sort of doing during the pandemic.
Well, I think it's interesting when this has gone on for nearly a year now and will continue to go on. There's a way in which there was a fear that I had about some really worthwhile projects emerging from the early days of the pandemic, that we would not want to look at it anymore after a certain point, that we'd be on the other side, and that would be from a sort of a period of our lives that we want to forget. And maybe hopefully we documented it well, we'll revisit at some point, but we need to get to the other side. But it's interesting, a year into it, how moving I find it to be to revisit this moment, because it's a significant part of our lives that now is retreating, for like, we are still in it, and so therefore there's another moment in the same overarching experience that we're having that we get to revisit, and I get to relate to what you were all creating at that particular time, and relate that to the months to come, you know, rather than, you know, just a, you know, put things in a box and put it away and discover it 10 years later. Like, less than a year later, this has a different resonance maybe than it had for all of you at the time. And I think that's really valuable. And I also think that there's a you know, there's a way in which this is a collection of amazing work. I really do think it works as an overarching piece as well, which is a testament to you, Sam, and to you, Jason, as well, to sort of make this into one overarching experience that contains 6 others.
I do have to say, and I don't know if everybody would agree with this, to me, it doesn't feel essentially like that box of like a pandemic film at all. But
yeah, no, that's what I was trying to say, is that like in some ways it could have been that a lot of work during that time might feel that way, and this doesn't at all. This feels remarkably like of this moment as much as it was for the previous moment and for the future. I mean, it's discovery. Like there's so many moments of discovery that are going on here, and I think where it lands with Antoine in terms of just, you know, kind of pure cinema is wonderful.
Because I know we're coming to an end, I do want to thank Casper Newbolt for all the titles. You know, he was very generous in doing this, and I think it works phenomenally and really does help set the structure of the film. And then Michael, Glenn, and Delaney Foster, because there were specific scenes in my parts that, like, I have severe OCD with things not being symmetric, and Soledad will tell you this. So like I reached out and I was like, hey, could you just change the rooftop and make it like, so I just want to thank them for like taking time and just doing this favor for me. And if anybody, you know, because if anybody wants to thank anybody, I think because it's such a small group and, you know, not too many people worked on this film, please do thank who you want to thank.
I think I just want to thank all you guys, honestly. It was beautiful seeing, you know, what was more interesting is, I think we've talked about this, but how we all saw the film, you know, and I found it amazing. I saw it was so beautiful, the way everybody lived this same period of time in such a complete different manner. To me, it was just, you know, I felt myself in each one of your cities, you know, and I've only heard about, oh, this is what's going on in Buenos Aires. Oh no, New York, you know, you hear all these things. So it was beautiful to actually see how all of you guys were living all through this in your geographic reality, you know, and how different it was for all of us. I thought I enjoyed it a lot. I really loved seeing it all together. You know, when Sam sent me the link, I was like, oh, dude, this is so good. Yeah. Yeah, really, really good. And I was really nice to find out that you shot Soledad through a little 35mm cartridge. I think there's something poetic about all that, you know, as well. So I was wondering what it was, and now that you said it, was like, oh, that's even better. Yeah.
It was a green one. That's sometimes it was.
Very cool.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Go ahead, Antoine, please.
Just a question, Soledad. Why did you decide to reduce? Because maybe you talk about that just before, but is it a way to this core that you use to limit the frame? I mean, I did, by the way, I did differently, but is it linked directly to the aspect of the lockdown, or is it just that you want to make an experience? I don't know if it's an idea really linked to the what's lockdown mean. I mean,
I think that came later. First I was like experiment and then trying to like all the frame was like all other much other things were happen, and then with that I was only concentrating on maybe my dog that was doing something like in the edge of the frame, and when I was rewatching it, I was like just looking at that. So it was like a kind of the metaphor of concentrating myself only in one thing. And that was like sort of a talk what was happening with the pandemic and the thing that we are all in our houses. But then the conversation came later. I was experiment with all of these feelings in my head. So I think, yeah, yeah, that.
So I was just going to say that I would love to see what you have been able to maybe work on, if you've been able to work on things the last year, and hopefully you all able to be unbound in the months coming up to make the work that you wanted to make, and that you have been able to, whatever opportunities have come since then. And I'm very, very curious about those of you who were able to direct your own piece here and might want to do more of that in the future. I'm really excited about that idea, and want you all to be able to come to the museum whenever we reopen. I'd love to have you all at the museum for a screening of this film, for other films, and just to sort of be able to watch movies together. And I really miss that, and miss being able to host you all. So soon, hopefully. Thank you for making time and doing this.
Thank you. Nice
Thank
to meet
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
As well.
Thanks to meet you all. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Ciao.